When there is a caution, you used to say what across the radio?
Well, before I'd say the radio, usually I said, oh, and I won't go into the four-letter word, but I would say put it out. Okay.
Hey, there it is. Hey, welcome to Money Lap Podcast. I'm Parker Kligerman, joined as always by Landon Cassill. And Landon, we are back! We took a couple weeks off. It's okay. Don't worry. We're still here, ready to talk racing. What can you expect on today's show? We have, of course, a lot of discussion regarding the Cup Series and many of the latest announcements and happenings that happened over the last few weeks. That will be after we dissect the Richmond finish from this past weekend with a very special guest. None other than someone that had basically officiated the top level of the sport for 30 years. He was famous for a single term in terms of saying, put it out. None other than David Hoots will be joining us here on the Money Lap. We'll dive into that a little bit after the PR lap. And, of course, we'll give our thoughts and opinions on what happened at Richmond and some, as I mentioned, all the latest happenings and news after you get to hear our discussion with David, which was awesome. We also have some F1 news that we'll dive into, but we start, as always, with the PR lap. And, Landon, we mentioned it. NASCAR took a little break. Probably the first one, or the second one ever, basically, to have a summer break. For Xfinity, it was 3 weeks in total that we've been off. What did you do during that break?
I set up a bunch of furniture and, just kind of messed around here up in our house in Iowa. I didn't really go anywhere. So watch the Olympics every night. This is probably the most Olympic content I've ever consumed in my life. I don't know what it was. I think it was maybe the Olympic schedule and then my wife and kids getting super into it. So the Olympics were kind of on our TV all day long, and then we would watch the primetime on NBC at night. It just was a lot of... Now, I will say it was the all-day Olympics and then, primetime. So it was good. We're a big Olympic family. Some great moments.
Well, you and a lot of others. It's like record TV ratings and viewership across all the platforms of the Olympics throughout this entire Olympics. Like the highest in 2 decades, basically. So you weren't alone.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I wondered that. Thank you you answered a question that I had asked myself the other day, and then I didn't use the internet to answer it.
Well, that was your first mistake.
It felt like a well-hyped, well-watched Olympics, so it was good.
It was incredible. I actually got to go to the set that you watched Mike Tirico from in Paris with the backdrop of the Eiffel Tower. I got to check that out. Of course, if you saw my social media, I deleted Twitter because I went on the longest vacation of my entire life. It was epic. Went to Paris, hung out with my lovely girlfriend for a little bit, but she was working on the Olympics like 18-hour days, so we didn't really see her. But 2 of my best friends in the whole world joined me over there. Jamie Pendry and Cronin Cullen, and then we met up with Cronin's sister, Erin, down in the south of France. We went to Nice, Saint-Tropez. We rubbed shoulders with the rich and famous. That was a lot of fun. And then Jamie
You are
and
so
Erin,
much cooler than me.
Well, just saying. So then, I saw there's a bunch of F1 drivers in Saint-Tropez right now, so I just missed that overlap on their break. But then we, Jamie and Erin went back to Los Angeles. Cronin and I continued on to Greece for a wedding for a buddy of mine.
Jeez, it gets better.
It gets better. We went to Santorini. Yep. We were there for a couple days. That was a wild time.
Our dogs rescued a groundhog on one of the Sunday mornings. It was it was a little messy and
do you know we found the best bar in every location? I now know the best bar in Paris.
Now I'm trying to compete with this, whatever the hell you did for the last 3 weeks.
Well, I know the best bar in Nice. I know the best bar in Saint-Tropez, and I know the best bar in Santorini. So if you need a tip,
I know the best bar in Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Well, you might know about it. Yeah, I would assume. Is it? Do you own it? Anyway, my point of bringing it all up, it was epic. I did see the swimming. The first night of swimming where the men's relay happened and they won, and Snoop Dogg sat 2 rows behind us. So I blew up his spot. So I got to tell this story real quick because I think people love this. We walk up there. We got these seats through Shannon and Comcast, NBC. And I knew Snoop was there because I know Shannon had been working on this and I knew some of the behind the scenes. Anyway, he was up against the back and he was filming with one of the swimmers' wives and their kid and sort of just cheerleading, that sort of thing. And no one knew he was there. So we walk up, and we're like 20 minutes late. We might have been at the bar. And I see him up there, and I'm like, Snoop-a-loop! He just points at me. And the whole crowd turned around with phones. It was crazy. Suddenly his spot was completely blown up. But he was great. we bantered back and forth a little bit, which was fun. And then Tom Cruise was there as well. He was up above us, which was interesting. So overall, a most insane time of my life. Really, really cool. Glad, I hope NASCAR will continue doing things like that because that was really cool to have a little break in the summer. Should we talk racing?
Yeah, let's talk racing. I mean, that was. I'm jealous of your trip. I tried not to tell my wife much about it.
Poor Katie. I hear Iowa. They call Iowa the American Riviera, like the French Riviera that we were in. Right? No. Let's talk some reviews. We did get a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts on our quest to 200. I believe we're at like 175, so we're almost there. Dream host on a podcast by Really, Really Sweet on July 23rd. I love this podcast and look forward to every new episode. Keep up the great work, Parker and Landon. I have a question for Parker. I'm watching a video on YouTube about Bob Bryant about his career in iRacing. How does one become an iRacing team owner in NASCAR? Well, funny you ask. We're both now team owners with our e-racer team. That's what that team morphed into. And he's talking about Bob Bryant had a documentary put together by DJ which is excellent. I just saw yesterday. It's almost at 500,000 views. People have watched this about
Seriously?
Bob winning that race when we were Kligerman Sport, and we had Valvoline come on when I brought Valvoline into their first ever sim racing sponsorship, which was a really cool moment. He won at California that year. I was filming Proving Grounds when that happened out in the desert of California, and we were watching on a little iPad in the production trailer. Basically, like they had a little classroom set up there that we would sort of house everything in. And we were all watching after a day of filming, and I won, and they all dumped seltzers on me. So that was pretty funny. But there's a whole documentary about how he won it through fuel mileage and such. It's pretty cool. So, Spotify, you want this one?
Oh yeah. Well, we need a next week podcast from Shadowheart 1665. So, sorry, this was about 3 weeks ago that this one was left. I'm sorry.
Well,
what
you
am I
did
looking
the YouTube one. You did the YouTube
I'm on the
one.
YouTube one. You said Spotify. I'm on YouTube. This is pretty typical of me. So
I'll take the Spotify.
Well, I'll just skip to the YouTube one. That it's a little bit outdated. Sorry, Shadowheart. This is just getting back to you. Pretty much like some of the fan mail that I just signed, because on Sunday I cleaned out our garage and found some fan mail from like the Starcom days.
Oh my gosh.
And so I signed 3-year-old fan mail and 4-year-old fan mail and put it in the mail. So somebody is getting some long overdue fan mail. So Shadowheart, long overdue comment, wanted us to do a pod during the break. Didn't know what they would do during work without another podcast. Sorry about that, but we were contractually obligated not to compete with NBC during Olympics.
Yes.
So
that is a true story.
We didn't want to draw any viewership away from the Olympics. Proud of the Olympics for their record-breaking viewership. Yep. We feel like we had a hand in that. Also, 100%. Parker, Chad on Spotify, which great username, by the way, for such a platform. Just Chad. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's not exclusive usernames. Chad says he's a huge NASCAR fan and casual of other racing, about like me. This pod is amazing. Great insights and perspectives from two dudes who know their stuff and can't help to laugh with them as they have a good time. Yes,
Yay.
We're having a good time. We're just having a good time.
We are. Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks, Chad. That's all we had out there. So if you guys want to leave us a review, please do go leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Also, if you want to write us an email, friends@themoneylap.com. We actually have gotten some of those emails and then just not talked about them, so we apologize about that.
You know what you could have done when you were in Europe for 3 weeks?
What could I have done?
This would have been the smartest thing ever, except we're just not smart. We didn't.
That's a given.
We could have properly activated for our partners. You could have ordered a diecast from SpoilerDiecast.com and had it delivered internationally. Because SpoilerDiecast.com delivers internationally. They do have an international shipping policy. They ship to all countries. The cost does vary by product and destination. So if you do happen to find yourself in the south of France and you're like, I need that Austin Dillon race win diecast from Richmond. The cursed number 3. Or, the 20. I need to buy a 22 Joey Logano diecast just so I could break the right rear toe link off of it. Then look no further than SpoilerDiecast.com, one of the fastest growing companies in the industry. What sets them apart, Parker, other than international shipping and the best service? Spoiler Diecast prides themselves on exceptional service. They ship all their orders either same or next day, which means I think you could have gotten it while you were still in France, while you were in Europe, if you would have ordered it quickly. You would get your hands on your favorite products in no time. The best part, you get free shipping on orders over $20. I don't know about the international part, though. I'll have to check on that. That's right.
It sounded great, though.
Smooth and affordable shopping experience with SpoilerDiecast.com. They have over 1,100 unique products in stock: NASCAR, IndyCar, F1, dirt, sprint cars, all that stuff. They are passionate race fans, just like us, Spoiler Diecast. You can also go visit them in Fort Wayne, Indiana. But if you live in Europe, I would recommend trying the shipping.
That was a 10 out of 10 transition. I won't lie, you haven't missed a beat. You might have gotten better with a little break. It's like it allowed you to regenerate.
Clear my head.
Yeah, regenerate some ideas.
A little clarity break.
And get some clarity and be able to put that out there because they were getting a little lackluster, I'm not going to lie. So we were all disappointed. Hey, we mentioned it. We have a guest, David Hoots. He was the race director for 30 years of the NASCAR Cup Series. We're going to go into that right now, and then just stay tuned after the interview where we're going to give you guys our opinions and thoughts on what happened in Richmond and talk some of the latest news from around the racing world.
You ready to talk about racing?
Hope so. Always interested in it.
Perfect. You know what? That's the perfect intro. Here on the Money Lap, we have none other than David Hoots, who is the race director for the NASCAR Cup Series for 30 years. Your first time in the officiating booth up there was in 1988, and we do have to give a little credit for you being on this podcast to one of our special producers out there. He goes by the name of Dale, and I guess I should just put his whole name out there because he's actually our booker for guest David, but it's Dale Earnhardt Jr. And when we reached out to him, he immediately said, "Call David Hoots." So you can blame him for you being on this podcast. We appreciate you coming on.
Now, hold it. You can't be passing the buck on other people, and Junior has had at times he's kind of got himself in a little bit of hot water. So
you guys have a good history. Good history. Well, we first of all, we appreciate you being on here because you're such a legend of the game. But of course, it's timely with what happened this past weekend at Richmond with the last lap incident between Austin Dillon, Joe Logano, and Denny Hamlin. I should say that we are recording this on August 13th, Tuesday at about 3:40 in the afternoon, so there has been no penalties released, which NASCAR normally does later today or later on Tuesdays, sometimes on Wednesdays. But, David, we want you on here because you, as I mentioned, have officiated these races for 30 years. From what you saw the other night, what was your initial reaction to what Austin Dillon did to the 22 car and, of course, the 11? Was it fair game?
I don't think that anybody really can say what the 3 car did was in the fair game realm. I wouldn't try to speculate his intent or what he was thinking, nor would I question what the sanctioning body may do, because you're right, we don't know what the penalties will be. But it just didn't appear like there was an attempt to make the corner and come out on the other side. The attempt was to try to get into the back end of the 22. And again, we don't know what his intent was, or should we judge it? We just can only look at the results of what happened. As far as the 11, it's always a question mark when somebody is hit in the right rear, if you will. It's always been viewed as somewhat of a area that you don't want to get into, but in that case was, again, you can't judge intent, or was that just 2 cars coming together at the wrong point of time, one coming down, one going up, and both going for the win at that point. So it would be you have to kind of break the two out, but the first one probably precipitated the second one as much as anything.
So where I want to start with this, David, is I kind of want to look at our whole body of work as NASCAR and as stock car auto racing, because we are different than other forms of motorsports. We are, it's my perception that our brand is that we're raw and we're authentic, and I think that NASCAR, while NASCAR has gotten in the middle of rough driving over the course of decades, many of those penalties you yourself have probably doled out, and you yourself have chosen not to initiate. I feel like NASCAR has made itself a brand that doesn't, more often than not, does not get in the middle of rough driving on the racetrack. They let the drivers handle things, right? So
I would say that's a fair assessment.
Yep. So if we all agree that what the three did was over the line, right? We could go down a slippery slope and say, okay, we need to officiate more, right? And there needed to be a black flag either immediately or right after the race or maybe even on Tuesday. But is there a bigger issue at hand here to keep us from going down that slippery slope where now all of a sudden we have, Hoots, if you were in the booth, you're making calls on every single week, right? Which we don't want to do, right? We don't want to be in the middle of every single thing.
Well, let's back up just a little bit and kind of give some flavor to the whole thing. Whether it would be me in the booth or the current staff that's up there, it's a team of officials officiating. It's not one individual or one voice or whatever. Now you would, in my case, you would hear me verbalize the call over the radio, but there was a team of experienced officials looking at stuff and judging stuff based on what they saw. I think the first thing, if you look at this, more specifically the Sunday night, try to define what you're describing. What is quote rough driving? What is over the line and whatever? And you will see in most cases, there's never been a descriptive definition of that. I think that the history of stock car racing is pretty much, you'll kind of know it when you see it. And so that this becomes the eye test more than technology-driven measurements and analytics and whatever. And in the day that I officiated, we didn't have as much technology that's there now. So let's go back and again, sit there and try to describe what we're going to describe. And the more that you try to describe it, probably the more in the weeds you're going to get to what it is and what it's not. I know that sounds kind of hard or kind of cloudy, but at the end of the day, I see nothing wrong if Landon and Parker, y'all are out there racing and there's some contact. And I think good racing, there could be some contact nose to rear, doesn't matter which car. But I think the respect factor is, okay, I made a mistake. I allowed you to kind of save the car and recover. And it's kind of no harm, no foul. And I think that's the way the sport was officiated for a long time. It seems like, though, that we've taken it to the excess, and there's a couple things that's probably driven that, is everybody has simulations now, and they can go out there and practice and try these different maneuvers. And you can go back to Martinsville a couple of years ago with Ross Chastain making his move at Martinsville, which is kind of something he probably learned on a video game. Okay, don't blame Ross for that move. If you go a few years before that, you have Carl Edwards trying to make the same move. I believe it's on Jimmy Johnson at Kansas.
Yep.
If it sticks coming out of 3 and 4, he's a hero. If it doesn't, well, then in this case, he ends up second. He's trying hard, but at that point, in no means did Carl hit Jimmy. But he was trying something that the simulator had led him to attempt, because you couldn't do that with a race car 10 years ago. You'd be destroying race cars. So that's kind of done it. The second thing that I think that simulation and technology and whatever has brought to you is you try something like this, it doesn't work, you hit the reset button and you start it again. You've never really paid the consequences. The consequences used to be on Monday morning, you'd wake up real sore where you got into the wall. You don't do that as much, which is a good thing. I'm not sitting there wanting to see anybody get hurt, but the wall was somewhat taught you didn't want to do that, and you didn't want it to be done, so you raced with a different level of respect than what I'm seeing out here today. Some of the things that are different from today than back then is the format that the people are racing under. I had some conversations with some people, and they said, well, I'm getting to where I don't like green, white checker in overtime. I wish we went back and just ended the race when in the race. I said, well, hold it. There's a couple of things going on there. Winning you're in has changed the dynamic. So the racer is racing to the format. No different than if you go back before 2003 and when the chase was developed, the racers raced for a season-long championship. They tried to accumulate the most points over the course of the year with the most consistent way they could do it. That's not in play as much as it is right now. You know, last 3 years in the playoff era, if you will, you could have had a champion of Phoenix and then of the series not win a race. Okay. Yep. To compare something 20 years ago to now, it's a comparison, but it's not apples to oranges. So you have when you're in, you have elimination, and you have
there's a lot of pressure.
Part of it, there's a lot of pressure to produce at all levels, and on both sides of this equation, where it's officiating, where it's whatever, and then you have the additional scrutiny of social media and TV and whatever, and they have 43 angles of everything in the technology that you can go back and prove it. Or disprove it, or draw conclusions. Not saying they're right or wrong or indifferent, but here's kind of the facts of the matter. So all that is added into it, and when you're set up with 2 or 3 laps to go, your mindset is either I'm going to be a hero or I'm going to be a zero.
Right.
That wouldn't occur. That wouldn't occur so many years ago.
Right. You brought up something earlier though, that when you're talking about the simulation. Something that I want to get your opinion here, because this is I beat this drum so many times. Parker and I talk about it all the time. You know, you said that the drivers, because with simulation, they can take risks, they can do things that they couldn't do before with the older cars or the old technology. But there's one thing I want you to think about, and let me know here. The cars that you watched the majority of your career through the 90s, the 2000s, these steel-bodied cars with the radiators exposed right in the front, just under a thin shield of shroud. If you made that move in 2005 that Austin made and hit the 22 at the velocity that he hit him with the 2005 NASCAR Cup Series car, Austin himself wouldn't have made it to the start finish line. He would have 2 flat front tires and spewing water out of the front of the car.
He would have been challenged to make the second set of contacts and get to the checkered flag.
Right.
At
but
the
now
line.
we've given him a car that is so durable that he can fire it into the corner, and there's very little risk on his end. The only risk is at that point is NASCAR going to make a call or not? So I feel like the car is empowering these drivers to drive this way.
Yeah, but you would have, I think, to be fair about that, you would have to not only judge the Cup Series, you would have to judge the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series.
Mm-hmm.
The trucks and the Xfinity cars are not as robust or durable as the Cup car, but you see a lot of the same things going on, and whether it's the trickle down effect of what they're seeing or whatever. But it is a uniquely different race car, and it does have some of those characteristics. Beforehand, that you didn't have the composite front nose piece, you basically had factory trim that was covered with aluminum.
Mm-hmm.
So it would give up more. And then when the COT came on board, the bumpers started to align a little bit more, but then that created another situation of quote the bump drafting, that they would line up beforehand. Before the COT, the rear car would likely go under the trailing car would likely go under the rear of the leading car and lift it, because there was such an abrupt angle of how the bodywork was mounted on the chassis. So you know, the whole thing has evolved, and the racer is and always will race to the rules and to the officiating. And one of the things that I would try to educate anybody that would listen, or any young official, first off, you're better off being consistent. The competitor can adjust to the consistency. If you're sitting there one side of the pendulum, then the other side of the pendulum, that's where the competitor is going to have a hard time following what you're doing. You want to be right, but you want to be consistent in what you're doing, so they know what you're going to do. Okay.
Right.
How the crew in race control manages the race precipitates other things. So if this is, history tells me that if something like this had happened on a Friday night in a truck race, and it would be addressed Saturday in the drivers' meeting for the Xfinity race, and then come Sunday, everybody that's in the garage that day had already listened to how it would be addressed. So this problem, or however you want to look at it, you can't sit there and say, well, we want the drivers to settle it all. Well, when the drivers used to settle it all back in the day, you could take somebody down in turn 3 and dump them, and there wasn't a TV camera down there. Now that's a long time ago, but that would happen. Or you'd have a Richard Petty or a Bobby Allison or somebody addressing you and reminding you, or a Dale Senior, hey, we've got some protocols of the right and wrong, and you kind of crossed over. It didn't mean they were saints or whatever, but the parameters of what they're playing in has changed, you know.
And I'd like to, I'd like to dive into that because you brought up something earlier that I thought was really interesting, and I'd love your opinion on this. And that you sort of brought up the idea of how do you define what is over the line, right? Which everyone talks about, this invisible line of saying there's over the line. And you personally, I know, have sat in those Monday and Tuesday morning or meetings at NASCAR, and you guys over the decades decided what was and wasn't over the line. And, when we look back, one of the things I think that really sticks out to people of where NASCAR got involved in sort of deciding the outcome of a race at the end after a move was 1991 Sonoma Ricky Rudd, right? First Davey Allison spins him out, the win taken away, right? Since then,
Right.
and I'm sure you were a part of a lot of those meetings and those discussions, that didn't happen going much anymore. Why, what was discussed? Why did that change? And, why was it so hard to define that line? What were those discussions like?
Well, they have been ongoing since probably the first two cars have ever raced. Okay.
Yeah.
And what you would see over time is that it evolves. What one car would allow you to do, another car wouldn't. If you come from different disciplines of racing, the car will allow you to do certain things that other cars won't. And let's think of it this way: if you're racing an Indy car or a Formula One car, it's an open wheel race car or a World of Outlaws car. You as the driver never want to see the tires and the wheels touch. It is a bad recipe. Okay. So you race accordingly. When you go to let's say a modified car that has Nerf bars around there, you race with a little bit of different respect because of what the tires and the exposure of the tires will do. When you race a cup car, and if you go back a very short time ago, the wheel wells were open, so the tires could touch, especially on a short track. But the effect of that car touching is totally different than an open wheel car. So you race these cars differently. Sports cars, they will get in trouble and have to be policed and officiated, and it may be 3 turns back, but the racetrack is changing its direction. In a stock car, Charlie, you're going around the oval, so you know to look for the left rear and the right rear and see what's happening. But you have a front fender and a front bumper up there. Before the composite bodies, you couldn't lean on people nearly as much, but on a short track, the wheel wells were opened up and you could have some exposure. Now you don't have donuts on cars, and by design, to make the car a little bit safer and encapsulate the tire and the wheel assembly, the fenders go over the tires to contain them. Okay, so you don't have that. So the car is as much allows some things to happen as not. This over the line, go back again, back when it was a true driver owner running it. The driver knew he had to fix it. If he tore it up, he was going to be spending what he'd earned this week and putting it back together to get to the next racetrack. It's a different mindset now. You would never think about trying to destroy your race car. You'd have to put it back together.
Right,
so
but how has the officiating from your point of view changed since then? Right, like how have you had to adjust from that time in 1991 when Ricky Rudd gets the win taken away to where we are now, where a car drives from car lengths back into the rear bumper of another car?
That part of it, I don't think that has changed. That goes back to it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck. Mm-hmm. This is not a normal racing move. Because if he drives 5 car lengths in there, does he really expect to come out of the turn? And without something happening, he shouldn't expect that. Okay, again, and I'm basing it on what I heard Austin say. Well, I changed gears and it rotated after I made contact. Could that have been possible 5 years ago without the sequential gear shift? I don't know. I never had to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
But again,
you answered a question though that I think you kind of answered your own question at one point, or at least helped me kind of clarify. earlier you asked the question of what is the line? What do we all define as the line, right? And you kind of said something, David, just now that he came from 5 car lengths back. It's not a racing move, right? Because the line, we can't say that the line is outcome, right? Because we've seen plenty of wrecks for wins that looked like racing deals, right? So just because the 22 got crashed doesn't mean that the 3 crossed the line. That's not the line.
I think for clarity, we shouldn't say 5 car lengths, because I think that would probably be an exaggeration, but at least 2.5 to 3 car lengths, that he overdrove what the cars around him did. Okay. He overdrove the 22 by 3 car lengths to catch him. When you look at what the 11 did as a comparison, only for a comparison, the 11 didn't try to gain 3 car lengths to anything. So is this a racing move? And I think that's how you have to judge it. But you have to judge it. Unfortunately, you need to judge it on the spot.
Right. Well, Denny made that point on his podcast, and I actually really appreciated what he said. It settled me down for a minute. I'm not on the side of I don't want to say over officiating. I don't think waving the black flag on this deal would have been over officiating. I'm very much a purist on the NASCAR side, that I love that NASCAR has left it up to the drivers for so many years. Even though NASCAR has intervened at times, it's part of our identity that they leave it up to the drivers. But Denny did say something on his podcast that he just said, look, we just got to make common sense. Like, everybody wants there to be black and white and rules. It's not going to be rules. Just do common sense. And just like you said, David, I mean, the common sense tells you that the 3 was not a racing move. It wasn't an attempt to make a pass. There was no pass to be made. There wasn't a gap. There wasn't a hole.
Well, I think you can kind of judge it. If he was made, he would have been below him, not center to out on the outside of the car. So that kind of leads credence to it. But nobody wants to officiate this. But you have to, because at this point it's like I think we all agree here. This was not a racing move. Okay. And to NASCAR's credit, what Ross attempted successfully at Martinsville was not a racing move. We don't need to be tearing up race cars with 1 or 2 laps to go, and taking that move. Yes, he was be able to do it. I commend him for his creativity, but it's not what I grew up watching. Okay.
Yep.
And the other side of it is, you don't want to make the rule book any thicker, and you don't want to write it with more exceptions in it than it has right now, because that's where you'll end up, and you'll get criticized for not applying all these rules because you have written them to specific circumstances, and that's not good. So I think at the end of the day, if you take and apply the common sense rule, like Denny said, and I agree with him on that point, is common sense says this is not a racing move. And judge it for that.
So
judge it for that.
Well, if you're in the meetings today, what would be your vote?
Well, let's go back one step.
Okay,
Parker.
going back there.
Let's go back, and I know that we have the luxury of hindsight, David, but let's go back to you're in the booth at Richmond. I've been in that tower before, and I stood next to Mike Helton and right behind you and watched cup races.
Well, now hold on. Let me ask you something. Was you brought up there so we were trying to train you on something, or we would bring people up to let them look at the complexity of trying to officiate this sport.
Yep.
It is not as simple as I think our general fan thinks it is. It is a lot more complex, and there's a lot more things going on up there than people realize. And you sit there and you get a better perspective of what's going on.
So let's say you were in that booth Sunday night in the role that you were used to being in, and you witnessed what you saw, and obviously it was in the middle of turn 3 and 4. I was merely 5 seconds later they crossed the line with the checkered flag waving. What is the timing? Walk me through how the call gets made. If it were to get made, walk me through the timing, because clearly, obviously, we're clear to Tuesday, and we still have a winner. So,
okay, I think if you take the collective personnel that's in there, and you would have the vice president of competition, the series director, and the race director, they should be instantly conferring and trying to come up with a consensus opinion of what they just saw. And unfortunately, I'm trying to choose my words carefully, because I never wanted to be second guessed. And we, at one time, we had another sanctioned body do that, and a couple of days later, they realized. I'm not going to criticize what happened, but in essence, they should have had a consensus opinion, and in my opinion, took some type of action right there. Either it's good or it's bad. Simple as that.
Which I think that I want to assume, I'm going to make a charitable assumption, and I'm going to say that they did, because there was silence on the broadcast for over a minute, it felt like, Parker. Wouldn't you say? I mean, we texted each other during the silence and notated it. So there was silence on the broadcast, which tells me that the network was not getting maybe an official confirmation from NASCAR. Yes. I think NASCAR did take 60 seconds to make this decision.
And then with that said, that's probably what we'll have. That was what we'll have to live with, and they made the decision in those grounds. So
And what, like, all right. So I just want your thoughts, your opinion, solely yours, from all your experience. You're seeing that go down. What would have been your initial? I guess I can't say initial, but now that you've had the chance to think about it, you're in a meeting today. Everyone's discussing it. David Hoots says, here's what I think was what makes it correct. Here's what I think what makes it wrong. Here's my vote.
Well, they're at the point that it wasn't done instantly, there's a lot of things that change in the background. And it has to do with the application of the rules. If it's ruled immediately, it is a race procedure decision, which by definition is not appealable. If you issue the penalty today, whatever it is subject to appeal. It's a totally different dynamic.
Interesting. Wow.
And has NASCAR been contemplating that for the last 3 days? That whatever I am very confident that they've had numerous discussions and meetings and whatever. And their end goal is for the best thing for the sport. And sometimes the outward world does not look at it like that, because there is an inherent bias. He's your favorite driver, or it's your favorite OEM or whatever, and that's how the fan gets involved in it. But NASCAR's end goal is for the best interest of the sport.
100%.
So now you have to weigh through what is the best interest of the sport in this. Do you can go down this list of, do we allow this type of behavior to continue? Do we set a precedence and do this? Do we back up a step and try to address it in another way and whatever? So I'm sure there's multiple discussions that have been occurring, will be occurring until their decisions are announced. And at that point, I will tell you that I'm confident from my years of under Mike Helton and Jim France and Bill France that sometimes the decisions may not have been popular, but the end goal was for the best interest of the sport.
Makes sense. Yeah.
They don't want to get out there and have to officiate every little touch and whatever.
Yep.
And I don't blame them. But again, we're sitting here, and I think everybody recognizes somebody's crossed the line here. And even though we couldn't define it, we see it, and we saw it. So at that point, what is all the different ramifications that this comes? And we could sit here and take a legal pad and think of things they could or could not do and would not do, but you have to think through all the ripples in the pond that it's going to create.
Yep.
And that is probably what is taking. They're taking their time, and they're putting the due diligence to do that. Having sit in a couple of those meetings over the years, and in one of them, I'm sitting there and I'm saying, you can't. I won't tell you what it was, but I'll say, I don't think we want to do it that way. And it was like, a lot of people in the room didn't see it until they started thinking through this particular point of view. Okay. So then you have to readjust your thinking to try it again. Once again, make the absolute best decision for the industry.
Yep.
Because that brand NASCAR is not just to the company NASCAR. It's to all its partners. It's to all its competitors. It's across more avenues than you and I can even think about.
Yep. Of course. Let's well, first of all, and you know, we appreciate you diving into this. I know it's a highly complex situation, and I think we all three of us would agree that we want what's the best interest of stock car racing. We're all stock car racing fans, and there's contact in this. And so it's going to continue to be complex because we all believe contact's a part of this sport, but with that, there becomes a gray area of what is and what isn't right. And, you know, it's going to continue to be a discussion. If you don't mind, we'd love to just dive a little bit into your history and your career. And just out of curiosity,
Okay.
You know, you were up there for 30 years. What's a moment, maybe a favorite moment that sticks out to you, a famous call that you made that maybe others would know about? You know, when you look back at all the time you spent watching these incredible races, incredible moments, what's one that really sticks out to you?
I would say, and I've said this before, probably one of the things that I had been most proud of wasn't necessarily a call, but it was something that the industry did, and it goes back to the Coke 600 on Memorial Day weekend. We were rained out, and it was the first year that the race was stopped to honor the fallen, because we stopped the race at 3 o'clock for the moment of remembrance for all those fallen. When you're young, you may not have the appreciation of what the military has allowed us to do over the years, and we can do it very safely, and we can do it the way we want to. Do we do it always right? Probably not, but they allow us to do that. Them and first responders allow us to have the life that we have. The older you get, the more you understand it. So when we stopped the race and parked the cars for 2 or 3 minutes, it to me said, you know, we're on a big stage, but without the support of our military for over 200 years, we may not have that stage to be on. So let's have our priorities correct. As far as a call, there's some of them. Some of them I wished I'd had back. That's how you learn. The key to making a mistake is to learn from the mistake and think your way through of how not to make it. And that experience factor goes a long ways in it. If you continue to make the same mistake, you're not learning. You're backing up. I think going to some of the bigger races or traveling to the different things when we went to Indianapolis for the first time or whatever, having watched that race on Memorial Day weekend for all those years that it was on, you don't get the perspective of standing down into turn 1 and looking back up the front straightaway to turn 4 and seeing a sea of people on both sides of the racetrack. It's a truly spectacle to see it, and you don't appreciate it until you're there once. And you guys have raced there enough, you know what I'm talking about. But if somebody hasn't seen it, if that's not a reason to go to an event, there never is one. You go to the different racetracks and you see different things of how the racetracks have executed what they've executed. Some of them are truly remarkable, and then meeting the great people that you've met in this sport and how truly humble and sharp and they carry themselves. Those are one thing. The first Daytona 500 that I called, scared to death. It has to do with economy to scale. Okay. And you sit there and say, because I grew up on short tracks, and it's kind of where I learned some of my craft. But at Daytona, you have a couple of minutes to clean up a racetrack in directing those operations. At a short track, you got about 35 seconds. Well, all the steps have to be done in the 35 seconds. But you're going to cover more area at Daytona or Talladega. So it's economy to scale that you have to get used to. And you'd go from Michigan, which was a 2-lap racetrack, and go into Bristol the next Saturday night, and you've got to do all that and then sit there and be surrounded by 165,000 of your dearest friends. I remember going up to Bristol the first night that I went up there that they ran the night race. I wasn't working as an official. I was working on a radio network. The traffic was so bad, I got out and walked the last 3 miles to the racetrack to be there on time.
Oh my God!
It was and probably still is one of the absolute hottest tickets out there. And this is before it started coming out where Mr. Smith and the Smith family and SMI took a half-mile racetrack and continued to build on it, and they're still building on it. They're just trying different ways to make it exciting. Hell, it's an exciting race. You know, you put 40 stock cars out there and turn them loose at 15-second laps. It'll get your attention. You know,
hey, well, one thing that happens there, I need you. So we do have to let you go, but I do need one thing from you, which is when there is a caution, you used to say what across the radio?
Well, before I'd say the radio, usually I said, "Oh," and I won't go into the 4-letter word, but I would say, "Put it out." Okay.
Hey, there it is.
I don't.
You know that's
listen,
famous on the internet now.
Okay, but don't give me the credit. It was something that was already in place when I took over the position. But I've kind of been given
you gave it a charm.
and Well, I'd probably say a lot of things, and if I unkeyed the radio, you'd probably hear a whole different version of what I just it's what is you guys have been around. I don't know what's the most famous words in motorsport. It's not "gentlemen, start your engines." It's probably a two-phrase sentence, and you would probably say that if you're truly honest about yourself. But watching
100%.
watching cars do that, or go to Daytona, and it's the first race of the year, and they crank up the 40 stock cars, and you hear them rumble, and that feeling goes through your body, and everybody's charged up and ready. That's exciting.
Definitely.
Going and like I said, my love of my life is short tracks. Love to go to Martinsville. Absolutely enjoy going up there, and Darlington, because they're Darlington, Bristol, Richmond are old school racetracks. And I told Kerry Tharp when he took the position down there at Fresno, I said, Kerry, they can do a lot of refining and improvement of Darlington. Just don't let them touch the racetrack. keep it as just as it is, and make it just as hard as it is. Just don't let them mess with it.
100%. Well, hey, we appreciate you coming on. Thank you for the insight. You're a legend. This has been such an honor, and we'll hope to see you at the track here one of these days, man. You've it's been so cool to have you here and get your insight on all this and get your. Well,
I appreciate you reaching out to me, and I hope I brought some insight. I'm not trying to second guess anybody. I'm not trying to figure out the intent of what happened. I'm just sitting there trying to hopefully give you some flavor of what some people were having to deal with.
Yeah,
100%.
That's perfect. Thanks, David.
Thanks, David.
Y'all have a good afternoon, and I hope your fans enjoy it.
You too.
All right, that was awesome. David is a legend, Landon. But one of the things we didn't really get into there was our thoughts and sort of our opinions on what we saw this past week in Richmond that went down with Austin Dillon, Joe Logano, and Denny Hamlin. Before I get into it, I know you've been itching for this opportunity to get in front of a microphone and talk about this directly. What did you see, Landon? What is your thought on what happened this past weekend, and was it too far?
I want to do this together.
Okay.
So I'm going to walk through this together. So I've had lots of thoughts. I think we might be doing this together, or I might just be giving my opinion. I don't know. Let's see how this goes. So I've learned, I have thoughts and opinions. You guys know what I think about the car, right? I think I've been pretty consistent about that. I mentioned it in our conversation with David. I think the car is part of the problem. And let's go with that. I think I appreciate two things. I learned two things this week. I really appreciate how simply Denny put it, where he's just like, let's just use common sense. And David said the same thing, where he's like, we don't need to make the rule book thicker, because then there's just more unique scenarios you have to officiate to, right? So, all right. So I'm on board with that. So I'm going to draw a line in the sand on that. I'm going to be like, all right, let's use common sense. So now I think common sense can be what controls how we decide what the line is or not. And I think that I touched on it a little bit in our conversation with David. I feel like there's been consistency with everybody that I've heard from, my own opinions, what I've heard from you. The line was crossed with the 3-car this weekend, not because of the outcome, not because the 22 wrecked, but because it was not even a racing move, right? There was no pass to be made. There was no racing move there, right? So that's what crossed the line ultimately. So now the second piece that I want to ask, and this is the together part, is like, what is our ideology as NASCAR? Who are we? Are we trying to go in a direction where we are continuously trying not to officiate, and we don't want to be in the middle of the calls, and we want the drivers to police themselves, which is my perception of NASCAR's, one of NASCAR's fundamentals? Or are we going to have no problem stepping in the middle of it, right? And feel like we need to, as officials, officiate these scenarios, and that the drivers shouldn't police themselves, that we should step in the middle more often, right? What is our ideology? You and I have had this conversation, and maybe I'm just asking you to like repeat it out loud to me on the show to like allow me to continue down my conversation here. But
So
it's like,
would you
I
like
think
me to
it's door
talk
number
now?
one. I think it's door
Okay.
number one, right?
Yep.
I think that one of the things that sets NASCAR apart is that, historically speaking, now not to say that it's an absolute, right? But 9 times out of 10, NASCAR doesn't get in the middle of driver on track conduct. I don't know the right, driving regulations, whatever you want to call it, right? NASCAR historically does not get in the middle of it. Even though they have, it's not in their core identity, right? So with that said, I think the biggest changes that need to be made to turn the ship around have more to do with the car than anything else. That's not going to happen. The ship is kind of sailed, right? And I actually even David did I wanted to disagree with him, although I didn't, was trying not to make the conversation go too much back and forth, but when I brought up the car and he said that the Xfinity car is different and the trucks are different, I kind of want to raise my hand up and say, yeah, but, right? And he did actually kind of say this. The Xfinity car is really boxy. It's durable, right? The composite body, the bumpers line up, and even the trucks, right? Yes, they're steel body. They still have kind of the old, the old school piece of things, but they're even more durable than a Busch car and a Gen 5 Cup car was, right? Mm-hmm. So, and they're boxy and the bumpers line up a little bit better, right?
Yep.
So, I think, if I could just reset, if this was a red alert situation where NASCAR was like, oh my gosh, we have to fix this, Landon, what do we do? I would try to make changes to the bumper structures of these cars so that if Austin Dillon was tempted to make that move again, he wouldn't even make it to the finish line himself.
Yep.
Because of the car. So then NASCAR doesn't have to get in the middle of it. It just is what it is, right? And if he still made that egregious move and he wrecked both himself and Joey Logano, there's a natural penalty right there for Austin, right? He's out of the race. And yes, Logano's probably out of the race too, and they're wadded up in a heaping pile of cars. Then you can penalize Austin, right? And you can say, that was a dumb move. And we know it was a dumb move because you wrecked both of those cars. You lost the race for you and your team. You lost the race for Joey Logano, who didn't deserve to be driven like that. And oh, by the way, we're also going to slap a fine and a points penalty on you for being an idiot.
Yep.
Right? But instead, we have a car that is so durable that he can make that move. And then he puts it on NASCAR to take away the win, to penalize him, to give him a fine, give him points, give him all that stuff, and he still, at the end of the day, he's going to end up with the trophy. He's going to end up in the playoffs.
Yep.
But NASCAR's got to make some creative penalties. I know that they haven't announced them yet, but it's to me, I boil it down to I just don't like the car for that. I'm not saying I don't like the next gen, but I just don't like that aspect of the car. I don't like that he can make that move and still get around the corner. He should have never made it to the finish line driving a car like that.
And I think you brought it up with David where you mentioned that. You're like, this in the past wasn't even a need to officiate because it wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't have happened this way. One of the things I asked you and I talked about yesterday, and I said, what's funny is whether it's 1 car length back, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, although David did think 5 was too far and I was being over dramatic. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really matter because if you spin a car out from 1 car length back, would people find that in the eye test be less egregious? Probably, right? But the fact is, a car spun out. So, what does it really matter if you come from 5 car lengths back or 1 car length back? And what you guys went into is it's the eye test. If you have 1 car length back and you get in the back of them trying to move them up and they spin out, okay, that's different than coming back and pile driving someone from 3 or 4 car lengths back, right? Visually, that's different. That's the difference. But really, the result is exactly the same. So the only portion that we're discussing is that portion of, You weren't close enough to make a racing move as you guys went into. And therefore, the move you had to make was to, rocket a car off into a corner, and therefore to get to the car in front of you and be able to hit them at such a high rate of speed that they spin out. And you were able to do that because you mentioned it, the car is durable enough. I understand all that, and I think, hold on, my point on that is, I don't think you can officiate this, though. And we never got down that path with David. But you can't. You just will not be able to, because you cannot tell me, and he basically alluded to this, but you cannot tell me how to decipher the difference between a car being one car length back and spinning a car out and being 5 car lengths back and spinning a car out.
First of all, that was Denny's plea to common sense.
Yeah,
right?
I get that.
And
but you can't tell.
And that is a little bit of what a lot of people will say is a product of too many cooks in the kitchen. There's a lot of people up there, a lot of decision makers. If there was one clear decision maker up there, then that decision could be made, right? And it would be common sense to whatever is in that person's brain, right? If it was David Hoots and he's a sole person in charge, he could make that call. It probably wouldn't happen before the checkered flag in the scenario of Richmond, but it might have happened by the time the cold lap on the backstretch, right?
Yep.
They would have waved the black flag and given it to the next guy, right? To Denny or whoever. But I don't. I might even go as far as saying, and this is what frustrates me so much about the car and these moves, in a way. What the 3 did to the 22 was wild and egregious, right? It was a haymaker. Is it even that much different than what the 22 did to the 24 at Darlington?
That is what people have asked.
It's not.
Is it?
In my mind, it's not. The 22, what the 22 did to the 24 at Darlington was not a passing move. There was no pass to be made there.
Nope.
He rifled it into the corner,
wall,
used the 24
tapped.
to slow himself down, doinked him, right? Which I've said countless times because it's the only way to describe these two cars hitting each other. He just doinked him, broke his traction because we have low-profile tires that have no give to them, no slip, no slide. They're either gripped or they're not, right?
Yep.
The 24 hits the fence. The 22 slides on by, wins the race, right? How is that different than what the 3 did to the 22? There's no pass to be made.
Nope.
So I guess, and that's why I go back to this car, and I'm like, I don't want to go down a path where NASCAR has to say today on August 13th, 2024, okay, Austin, you're penalized, and from here on out, we might take the win away on the spot. Mm-hmm. Because now we're going down a path of officiating all of these moves and all of these races. And listen, 4 weeks ago, I was applauding SVG, I can never say his name, for the moves he made, and wondering to myself, is he the type of driver that he is because of racing driving regulations? I don't know. That's an interesting perspective.
I think one more thing we got to bring up is that you and I discussed this offline, but we both agree the hitting the right rear of the 11 with Austin Dillon, that was him coming back onto basically the racing line. The 11's coming up. I know I've seen some of the SMT that Bosey posted on Twitter and that sort of thing. I don't care. To me, that is, there's no one, if he had the cerebralness to be able to turn down and know how to clip the 11 perfectly, my God, he deserves an award. 2, I don't give a shit what the freaking spotter said on the radio about wrecking everything.
What the spotter said.
Spotter's not driving the damn car. And I do not care at all what they have to say. Yeah. No offense.
I don't think
to my beautiful spotters, but I
think
don't
that was
care.
a racing deal.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's a racing deal.
That was a racing deal.
No,
I will absolutely agree that the 3 might have been turning abnormally to the left in an effort to block, hit someone on the side, door slam, whatever.
100%.
Right, but there was such a speed difference between the 11 and the 3 that I don't think the 3 was like, oh, I'm hooking the 11.
He was in
I think it was just
mode.
a desperate move to either stay off the 22, to block whoever's coming from the inside, whatever. So
he sees clean track. It's desperation mode of thinking, whatever I got to do, I just got to make sure.
He sees cars everywhere in his camera, right? There's smoke. That's a good clarification. Thank you for that. But I just my heart breaks to see that race finish the way it was. I had the same kind of sick feeling that I have had after some of our Daytona races where we just have this egregious, gross wreck at the end of a race that ruins what otherwise was a good race. Because actually, you know what? We didn't even talk, and I'm glad that we're talking about this now because we were debating on how much time to spend on this because we spent an hour with David. The thing that is so unfortunate about this, too, is Austin should have never lost this race.
Yes, he was a mile ahead.
Shame on Austin. Shame on Austin. And I've never been on the front row of a cup race in a green-white checkered with the car to beat. But, like, he did the worst thing in the restart zone that you could have done as the control car. He waited. He's the dumbest. Like, literally, if you're watching the broadcast, Steve Letarte said he needs to go early.
Yep.
If he goes early, he wins the race. And what did he do?
Foolproof.
He waited. Like, that is a guy. Like, that was a lack of preparation, a lack of knowledge. He was not ready for that moment.
Nope.
And it pisses me off. Like,
even though the 11, went super early there in the spring and won the race, whatever, it's like it doesn't matter. They're not going to police it. Just go. So
they should DQ him just because of that. That's what. You know what? I'm changing. They should be like, you know what?
Restart.
We listened to the money lap and we went back and looked at the restart, and you should have gone earlier, you dummy. If you would have gone earlier, you wouldn't have been in this position. You're DQ'd.
It was impressive. We'll dive into it next time, but RCR's speed and him that day, that was impressive for sure. Let's just dive into some silly season news that happened over the off weeks because I actually do have to run. We've been recording for 3.5 hours. So I've got to go. Corey LaJoie was announced he will not return to Spire Motorsports for the 2025 NASCAR Cup Series season. I have a lot of thoughts on this. I thought this was a surprising one considering all he's done with them. I know there was a lot of frustration on his end and the team's end over the results this season. Of course, I find it a little unfortunate that for someone who went there when that place was basically just getting done from being a starting park to building it in the organization is now has one sort of down period that's not even the full season considering his results last year were their best ever. And to just say goodbye, even though the person has another year on their contract, I find a little disenchanting. I also think, and I'm just going to call this out because I just am so tired of lazy, tired, and thoughtless decision-making amongst drivers. If this goes to some of the names that I've heard, I don't even understand the choice. I don't even get it. Unless Kyle Busch waltzes on in there and is the driver of the number 7, I do not see where the gain is, in that sense, if it's a performance thing. And so I know there's other factors involved, of course, but I find it just to be really a typical, if some of the names I've heard, I just find it to be a typical sort of smoke and mirrors decision that I'm not sure I agree with.
Yeah. Well, this sport is ruthless. You have to stand out.
Yep.
And sometimes standing out isn't always, standing out might mean you have lots of money. Standing out might mean you won a race. Right?
Yep.
And I think Corey has done a good job of standing out over the course of his time at Spire. But you do, at some point, I have learned as well, at some point, you have to win in NASCAR.
Mm-hmm.
You have to.
Yep.
Look at every driver in the Cup Series that has long-term rides. All of them. Let's go down the list. I'm free. Yep. I'm freestyling this right now. Who's got the who's got the point standings?
I think he was the only driver in the Cup Series who had not won a race in the top 3 series.
That's my point. You just fast-tracked what I was about to do on racing.
Technically, I've won 3 more races than him, so it was. I
don't
get it.
Well, hey, there's a point there. Like at some point, you have to win. Right.
I get that. If the choices are
and you could say, like, I will defend Corey that it's like, well, okay, he's driven for Spire. They haven't had the resource. At some point, it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because if Michael McDowell had not won the Daytona 500, he would not have made it the 2 more years after.
You're right. Yep.
At front row.
Yep.
Right.
That saved him.
And if he hadn't won again, at Indy, he probably wouldn't have continued to get the opportunities that he's getting.
Yep.
So it's just at some point in this sport, you have to win or you have to stand out in some other way, right? Otherwise, time will run out.
He, I know, has potential opportunities in the Truck Series. I would say go do that. Go win. To your point, go win. You know, if it's taking another sort of lesser Cup car, I don't think that's the move. For him, he's proven he can take those teams to be.
He's a good driver.
In a better position. Yeah, he's
just
proven
go
he
win.
can do it in better positions. Like just go win races. That's all you got to do. Juan Pablo. Let's just rip through these. Juan Pablo Montoya will drive the 2311 number 50 Cup car at Watkins Glen.
Cool.
That will be interesting. It will be his first Cup race since the 2014 Brickyard 400. Lots changed for him. He'll have a little bit of time.
So you're saying there's a chance?
Yeah. It was announced that, or said that in a video released, that Andretti Global President J.F. Thorman announced that the team is planning to expand its operation in the NASCAR Cup Series. Speaking of Spire, I'm pretty sure they're kind of in the NASCAR Cup Series. Wink, wink.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then just some driver news in F1. So we're not just all NASCAR. Carlos Sainz was announced that he'll be joining Williams Racing for 25, 26, and beyond. I mean, you can look at this two ways. He didn't have many options, or the capital group that owns Williams Racing, Doralton Capital, basically said, this is what we're going to do, and you got to, buy in. And I find this shocking that he didn't go to Audi or something connected more to a manufacturer. So we'll see how that plays out for him. But that was a surprising one for me, put it lightly. See him go there. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a little surprising.
I don't know. I just that one Ferrari to there. That's a tough
Did they
one.
pay up?
They must have paid up, but I don't think there's enough money. I think you have to basically prove to them how you're going to be competitive. How do you go from a championship level? I mean, somewhat what will probably be a championship level, but at least front running level Ferrari team to Williams. That's a tough putt. But with that, this has been a long episode. I've had a great time. Unfortunately, we mentioned him earlier, just a bit ago. He was supposed to come on as our other guest. That is Kyle Busch, but he couldn't make it because he was busy trying to find a place to put his bandage scissors, apparently. Maybe you watched the race and saw he had to clip that bandage. We hope to have him on next week. Thank you all for listening. That's the Money Lap for this week. We're back. Peace. Thanks for listening to the Money Lap. As always, check out themoneylap.com for the best 5 minutes in motorsports, or sometimes just the coolest stuff in motorsports, delivered directly to your inbox 3 times a week. Check us out on YouTube. We're growing fast over there. And, of course, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. We're all over the internet. We're spreading the word of how cool motorsports is. Check us out.